Hi class, welcome back. We are on connective tissue. In a previous video, we spoke about connective tissue proper. Let me just get my pen on here. Good. We spoke about connective tissue proper. We spoke about loose and dense. We spoke about areolar, adipose, reticular, and regular and irregular, right? Dense, regular, and dense, irregular connective tissue. We started supporting connective tissue, where we introduced the three types of cartilage. We said that fibrocartilage is the strongest. We can find it in the meniscus of the knee, the intervertebral discs, the pubic symphysis. We said that type 1 collagen fibers make that up, whereas hyaline cartilage is type 2. And elastic is really more elastic. We find it in the eustachian tube, the vocal cords, ligaments of the spine. And now we're going to go into bone. And when we talk about bone, we're going to focus on compact bone. I'll show you where spongy bone is, but compact bone is where all the fun lies and all the unique features. So when we talk about bone, bone is a reservoir. It stores all your minerals. It's like a bank, but a bank that stores minerals. And bone has different types of cells. We have osteoblasts, we have osteoclasts, and we have osteocytes. These are the main type of cells. And we're going to focus a little bit on the osteoblasts and the osteoclasts. The B in osteoblasts are going to build bone. These are the bone cells that form bone. They're the immature cells that make the matrix. The osteoclasts are going to dissolve bone or break it down. So osteoclasts are kind of like a macrophage. It's a type of macrophage, which means they come from monocytes. They come from monocytes. So osteoblasts are going to make the matrix. When the osteoblast makes its matrix and that all those calcium salts calcify and ossify, it gets stuck, and now it ends up becoming an osteocyte. It matures into an osteocyte. When you want to break down bone, we have an osteoclast. The function of the osteocytes are just to maintain the bone. When you have a group of these osteocytes, concentric lamellae, a central canal which has blood vessels, we have the osteon, which kind of looks like the wedding cake. I'll show you what I mean by that. So here's bone. And this part, we're taking a section of this right here, the solid part in the periphery, which is here, this section, all of this, all of this. So this is compact bone. And what we have in the middle is going to be more spongy. Okay. So all of these are called osteons. All of these are called osteons. Give me 1 second here. So the osteons are formed by these layers, right? These layers, all of these layers are called concentric lamellae. They're called lamellae, but when they go around, they're concentric lamellae. When you take all of these combined, all of these layers combined, and we isolate this entire section, that's an osteon. And in the center of the osteon is that central canal, also known as a version canal, which has arteries, veins, nerves, and even lymph vessels. That's in the center. So you can see that bone is very, very vascular. So when you break a bone, it does bleed. The outer layer of bone is the periosteum, and the inner layer of bone is called an endosteum. The periosteum, this is where muscles and tendons and ligaments are going to attach to the periosteum of bone. Okay, so all of this is all compact bone, and everything in the center that's not solid has a spongy look. That's your spongy bone. So spongy bone is going to be found in the proximal and distal epiphysis, right? When you look at long bone, if you look at long bone, the ends of the bone, whether it's the proximal end or the distal end, that's going to be the epiphysis. And then the shaft of the bone, that's the diaphysis. So spongy bone is definitely going to be found in the proximal and the distal epiphysis. And that's where the bone marrow is. And that's where a lot of the blood production is produced. Red blood cells and white blood cells. The spongy bone looks spongy, right? It has this type of appearance, like that, very, very spongy, very porous, has lots of trabecula. Trabecula are like the struts of bone, right? These are struts. Those are struts, that. But there's no osteons in spongy bone. The only place we're going to see osteons is going to be in compact bone. Compact bone is found here throughout the diaphysis. That's where we store a lot of minerals. It's much more solid, it's much more dense. So that real basic functional unit of compact bone is the osteon, and it's got that Haversian canal system. So the bones are going to protect us. It's going to provide movement for us. It's going to store minerals for us. And it's the site of blood cell formation, both red blood cells and white blood cells. In terms of bone, 2/3 of the matrix are made up of calcium, calcium salts. Think of that as the cement. And then 1/3 of the matrix is collagen. Those are going to be like the steel reinforcing rods. Think of how they make a building, right? They make building with steel columns, and then they pour cement all around it. They pour cement all around those columns to calcify and harden. And that's kind of how bone is. So bone has these collagen fibers with calcium salts and calcium apatite all around it. So 2/3 of the matrix is calcium salt and 1/3 is collagen. So when you hear that, you go, oh my goodness, maybe this is a reason why people have osteoporosis. One of the reasons, because the collagen is breaking down. 1/3 of bone, maybe it's breaking down because of those MMPs, the matrix metalloproteinases, from chronic inflammation. When you have chronic inflammation, you have MMPs that are around in circulation, and we know that breakdown of bone is a sign of chronic inflammation. So osteopenia and osteoporosis, we have to consider chronic inflammation as a cause and trigger, not just too little calcium. In fact, when many people take calcium supplements, it makes the inflammation worse and their osteoporosis gets worse. So you really have to determine the cause of the individual's osteoporosis. Is it from too little vitamin D? Is it from too little calcium? Is it from chronic inflammation? Is it from not enough digestive enzymes in their stomach? Is it from too little protein in their diet? Right? Because collagen comes from protein, but you digest protein in the stomach from pepsin, right? You need the digestive enzymes. So as people get older, the stomach of the lining thins. they don't produce enough pepsin or they don't have enough acid. And then what happens is they can't break down the proteins. If you don't break down the protein, muscle mass diminishes, tendons diminish, bone diminishes. So one thing dominoes into the next. So that's a picture that you should be familiar with. This is the osteon. It looks like a tree that was cut down. And the calcium and the phosphates give it kind of the hardness to bone. And that's why you want to be careful with soda. When you drink soda, soda has phosphoric acid. Phosphoric acid can break down the phosphate in bone and you can lose density. You could do an experiment where you can take soda and you can put a chicken bone in there and watch what happens to the pH of the soda. The pH of the soda from being acidic can actually become more alkalinic. The pH can go up because what you're pulling out of the bones are calcium, and calcium is a buffer. So you can go from an acid to a base. So you want to be careful with consuming too much soda because of the sugar, which is acidic, and because of the phosphoric acid, and that can break down bones. You want to be careful with that. We know that the osteocytes are stored in these cavities called lacunae, right? The lacunae are the cavities where the osteoblast got trapped. And now that the osteoblast got trapped, it's now called an osteocyte. It's kind of stuck in there. And the canaliculi, those are those spider-like extensions coming off of them. And it allows these different cells to communicate with one another. And that's what it looks like in the model, where you have all these concentric lamellae. You've got the osteocyte that's in a lacuna, right? These are the lacunae. These are the cavities. And when you see the blue and the red in there, that's the osteocyte that's stuck in there. You can see the blood vessels, the arteries, the veins, the nerves, the lymphatic vessels. They're in the central canal or the Haversian canal. And when bone breaks down, this is what healthy bone looks like. As bone starts to diminish and you lose the calcium and you lose the collagen, they get compressed. They call it a codfish vertebrae. This can happen, and all of a sudden, the person that when they were in their 20s and 30s and they were, 5'10", 6 feet tall, all of a sudden, by the time they're 70 or 80, they're lost 6, 7, 8 inches because of all the compression that's taking place. And the softest part of a vertebra is the anterior. So if we have vertebrae like this stacked upon each other from the side view, the softest part, if these are the spinous processes, the softest part is here, the anterior. So what ends up happening is the back is wide, then they start to compress. And then the vertebra on top of that starts to conform and take shape. And then the one on top of that starts to deform. And all of a sudden, you start to get this arc, and the person starts to get this type of posture. Okay, that's from osteoporosis. Now, this becomes so dangerous when you start looking at this, especially look at the ear, how far it is in front of the shoulder. People like this typically end up with cardiac issues because the nerves to the heart get compressed, but also the lungs are being compressed. So there's decreased oxygenation to their tissues, and there's decreased heart function. So they don't have the best blood supply. So decreased oxygen, decreased blood, decreased ATP, decreased energy. The digestive organs have poor posture, right? The pelvis is going to be distorted, so they're not going to be able to digest their proteins very well, so they get poor lean mass. They don't have good muscle mass. They start to atrophy. It's a very unfortunate thing that takes place. Okay, when we come back, we'll get into blood.